More now on our top story, the deadly shooting in Las Vegas. Still lots of questions and, of course, political ramifications too. To help us dive a little deeper into the Washington part of the story, I'm joined by senior editor of The Atlantic, David Frum, chief Washington reporter for the Boston Herald, Kimberly Atkins, and Bloomberg View columnist Megan McArdle. All are in Washington tonight. All right, I'm going to start with the U.S. president. He talks about thoughts and prayers, warm condolences for the victims. Was that the right message? Was it enough, David?
I think President Trump really hit a wrong message for himself. He read the script dutifully, but it sounded false. One of the things, there aren't a lot of good qualities to attribute to Donald Trump, but here was one. He's not a hypocrite. He doesn't pretend to be a good man. He doesn't pretend to be a devout man. But increasingly, as his base has shrunk to American evangelicals, he has spoken in a more religious way. He did that very strongly today. It didn't sound true, and so he squirmed while he said it. He wasn't effective.
Kim, what should he have said then, in addition to thoughts and prayers?
Yeah, it was a very different sort of approach that we've seen in the past. We've seen him with the thoughts and prayer. We saw him offer those thoughts and prayers. We didn't hear him talk about terrorism. And what we've heard in the past, especially with attacks overseas, such as London and in Paris and even in Canada, a pretty swift response from the president decrying terrorism, even here after the attack in San Bernardino, California, really calling that out. In this case, the actor was American, and we didn't see that same response. His spokesman, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, said later on that it's too soon to make that determination. But we know from this president, he doesn't tend to wait for all the facts to come in before he takes to Twitter and denounces something.
Megan, did you think that he left something out on this day?
You know, I think that immediately after these sorts of events, there's kind of a formula. And I agree that it isn't necessarily a formula that Trump's super comfortable with. Nonetheless, you pretty much kind of have to go with, this is a tragedy, our hearts go out to the victims. And if you want to talk about policy responses, I mean, you know, Obama certainly did after Newtown, but it has to be pretty limited because otherwise it looks like you're politicizing a tragedy. Also, I think, frankly, Trump doesn't have much of a policy response, and it's not entirely clear what, in this particular attack, what sort of policy response would have fixed it. But I think that there is no good way to deal with a grieving nation, and the president just does the best he can, which is to say, you know, we Americans are united in sadness for these victims and in determination to make sure this doesn't happen again.
But as was mentioned, the White House spokesperson said it was too soon to talk about policy responses and certainly not any time to blame or try to talk about organizations. What was she trying to do, David?
Well, she was trying to head off the reproaches that come after an event like this, because Megan said we are determined not to do it again. In fact, Americans are determined that this will happen again and again. They've accepted that. It's part of the price of the gun right. And let's make no mistake that the gun right is very popular, and it's become curiously more popular over the past 20 years. At the same time as fewer and fewer Americans own guns, those Americans who own guns own more and more. But even many Americans who do not own guns have accepted the NRA view of what the Second Amendment means. And that's now certainly a plurality and probably an outright majority of public opinion. So Sarah Huckabee and President Trump have the public behind them when they say they're not going to do much, if anything.
But surely this was shocking to Americans. I mean, it's a terrible event, the worst now. And I think, Kim, you tweeted out today that it's the worst mass shooting in modern American history, 15 months after the previous worst shooting. I mean, that's a terrible legacy.
It is a terrible legacy, and we're seeing this response. I mean, talking about heading off the opposition, people who are already, lawmakers who are already calling again for tougher gun control measures. But one thing that we've seen consistently time after time, whether it's Sandy Hook or whether it's the Pulse nightclub shooting or this, is that we see that call for increased gun control legislation and attacking this issue, at least coming together and talking about it and debating it. And that over time fades away and few things get done. I mean, people tell me, look, if it didn't happen after we saw children get killed in a school, or after lawmakers themselves earlier this year, just a couple months ago, GOP lawmakers came under fire from a gunman. If that doesn't spur action, it's really difficult to see what, if anything, could.
I mean, David, what do you think? Do you think this will have any impact on the gun legislation in America?
Oh, it probably will, but understand the direction. For 20 years, America has been changing its gun laws to make gun ownership more permissive and easier. And after each massacre, actually, to the extent that there's legislative action, the action is to make it easier to carry guns. So the United States now has a situation in which concealed carry is the law in every state, and more states are adopting policy of open carry. That is, you can actually brandish a firearm in public, so long as you don't point it at anybody at that moment. That's what we saw, and you increasingly see open display of guns at events like Charlottesville. When San Antonio City Council in Texas had its vote on whether to remove its Confederate statue, the City Council was surrounded by men openly carrying weapons. So the trend, Canadians might think that what happens is that there are no politicians debating tighter laws. There's some ex-politicians like Hillary Clinton who's brought it up. But the first politician out of the gate, Matt Bevins of Kentucky, again, called for more guns. Governor Abbott of Texas 2 days ago denounced professors who didn't want guns in their own classrooms. He denounced them. He said that they were afraid of the contest of ideas, the gun being, of course, an idea. So my guess is that we are going to see the gun debate is connected to some very deep things about this fracturing society, a society where there's increasing hostility along racial and ethnic lines. And the open display of weapons is part of the show of force that has become such a feature of American public life in the Trump era.
You know, Trump had Puerto Rico troubles on his mind prior to last night. Now he's going to Puerto Rico tomorrow and then Vegas the following day. What does this do to his support, to his base, to the way he's seen? Megan.
I don't think that this is actually very likely to move the needle very much, in part because his supporters are pretty hardcore. His favorable ratings for such a new president are not very high. And so the people who are with him, if he does nothing on Newtown on Las Vegas, or if he supports something like making these bump sliders illegal, I doubt that his people are going to abandon him. I doubt that there's going to be, but I don't think that you're going to see a big push like Obama had after Newtown, where, we're going to take this opportunity to do once-in-a-generation gun control, and it failed because the voter intensity was all on the side of the gun owners, even though they're a minority. They just care more about gun laws than kind of average everyday citizens, and they vote on it, which normal Americans have a bunch of things they vote on, of which this may be one small part. Okay. And that really shifts the political calculus in the president's favor.
Okay, I want to get Kim and David on that last point very briefly. What do you expect, Kim, when he goes to Las Vegas on Wednesday?
Yeah, I think, again, this will be a different atmosphere for Donald Trump. Usually when he travels someplace, he likes to talk about wins. I mean, if you think about when he went to Florida or Texas after the hurricanes there, he never spoke about the loss of life or the destruction as much as he talked about the resilience of Texas and the resilience of Florida and the great response by federal officials and sort of praising things as opposed to really addressing tragedy. He's never had a moment that George W. Bush had after 9/11 when he stood at Ground Zero and talked to first responders, or President Obama when he spoke after the attack on the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. So this will be his first chance to do this. He needs to soothe people. He needs to be a consoler. That's not his strong point. And we'll see just how well he does that. This is his first opportunity.
David, last word to you.
The trip to Nevada is a very risky thing for Donald Trump. That's the single most endangered Senate seat up for Republicans in 2018. It's a state where health care issues have been very important. Republicans are likely to lose that seat in 2018. Donald Trump has been at war with the Republican Senator, Dean Heller. It's also a state with a strong union tradition, especially in Las Vegas. It's a state with a growing Hispanic population. He may meet an uncomfortable reception there. And the trip to Puerto Rico, I just find it gobsmacking. The state is in a disaster zone. I mean, the idea that it can sustain a presidential visit, that's not a terribly selfish imposition of him to do. What will he bring them? I don't. That is for his own benefit. It is of no use to the state. I think he, on all of these things, it's important to remember that you think that there must be some clever group of people planning all this, but the people around Donald Trump are very much the C team. And when they're not thinking about their own immediate advantage, a lot of the decisions they make are not very clever.
All right. Well, lots to chew on there. Thank you very much on a really tragic night.
Thank you.